last week as I was studying for that message, I was changed just by studying it. We talked about this idea that perseverance is something that only kicks in when you need something, so that you don't have, right? Like, so you could be suffering from a lack of sleep, which means that you then need to persevere through the next day. Or you could be without food and you need to persevere then through, a week or two without solid nourishment or something. Or without friends, you're lonely, so you persevere. So perseverance is that lack, or it's created out of that lack. And all of us have to decide what we're going to do with that hole. What are we going to put there? And I said last week that all of us, to some degree, put faith in that gap. Whether you believe in God or not, you say things like, it's just a season, we're going to get through. You try to put faith in that gap in the absence of not having that thing, right? So that you can push through and get through. The question is your confidence based on a faith that is put where it should be? In other words, can that actually deliver? Because what we want is we want to not just go through suffering, we want to grow through suffering. That was another theme. Now, last week I kind of started with a statement, and maybe, again, some of you weren't here, so I'll just say it again. You've probably heard this. Some of you probably said this. What doesn't kill you can only make you stronger. We said that's mostly garbage. That is not true, because how many hard times have we gone through that have gutted us? Right? Or left us paranoid or untrusting or broken or scarred or just depressed. It's so easy to come through the other side of suffering less than we were instead of more. So there's a lot at stake when it comes to suffering. There's nobody in this room that gets a pass. There's nobody so close to God or eating so well or exercising so well, or there's nothing you can do to avoid suffering. The only question is, will you come out of it bigger than you were or smaller? Will you grow through your suffering, or will you just go through your suffering and let it take something from you as you walk through it? What I want to talk about today, because last week we talked about breaking through and the things that can happen if you put your confidence in the right place and you persevere. What happens when that doesn't work? What happens when you thought you had your faith in the right thing, in the right place, and you're building your confidence on it, and you're praying that prayer, and it's not answered? What if the healing that you thought was going to come didn't come? What if the friends you asked God for didn't show up? What if you thought you would turn a corner in your marriage and you didn't? What if you thought the money would come, it's coming, and it never came? And in other words, what happens when this perseverance thing lasts longer than you thought it should? So you thought you should, okay, there, yeah, perseverance, good concept, thanks, Brad. And I'm going to push through, and now I'm on the other side. Blip, I'm there, I made it. Except the valley's way longer than you thought, and there's no end in sight. What do you do then? Okay, so what I want to do is introduce you to a guy, and some of you have heard this name before, a guy named Abraham in the Old Testament of the Bible. He's called the father of faith. Like some of us have a reputation for being a good hockey player or a good dad or a good husband or just like an amazing architect or something. Can you imagine being known generations later as the father of faith? That's a pretty good title. Now, Abraham happens so early in the Bible, there is no Israel. There are no Jews. There's no 10 Commandments. There's just this guy, Abraham, trying to figure out faith in God. That's literally how old it is. So he's literally figuring it up, almost making it up as he goes along, as God is guiding him. And what I want to talk about today is in the book of Hebrews that we've been studying. Last week we were in chapter 10. Today we're going to be in chapter 11. And then next week primarily in chapter 12. Chapter 11 kind of gives us a bird's eye view of this guy Abraham and his life of faith with God and what he learned about persevering. Now, the really cool part about Abraham's story, again, is he's literally making it up as he goes along, or God is making it up as he goes along in some ways. Watch this. Here's how the story goes in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, so God showed up one day and said, Abraham, I got a road trip. idea for you. You've been wanting to go on this road trip, which didn't happen back then, by the way. Unless you were a nomad, you kind of stayed put, right? So he's settled in. Generations have been settled in. God says, I want you to go somewhere else. I want you to pack up your entire family, all your stuff, your sheep, your goats, your gerbils, your hamsters, all of it into like little bags and satchels, and get on the camels and off you go. Where are we going? I'll show you when we get there. Okay. So he somehow buys it. He goes with God. So literally, again, it's kind of making up as he goes along. And so when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. That's pretty cool. That's a lot of faith. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, this land that God was going to give him, that he had never been to, didn't know what it looked like, didn't know what it was. But when he got there, God said, okay, stop. What? We're here. Oh, okay. So he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. Why? Because he was. So he gets there, and he's coming over this hill. He's like, sweet, this is going to be awesome. It's going to be beachfront. I don't know. It's really exciting. And he gets over the hill, and God says, stop. And he's like, I'm standing in someone's yard. And he's glaring at me from the window. He's saying, get off my lawn. And this is the promised land. He's in occupied territory. So immediately, as Abraham grasps the fact that this promised land that he'd been given was occupied territory, immediately he's thinking, oh, this perseverance thing, like through the desert, journeying here, this journey is going to take a whole lot longer than I thought, because there's people living here. So how is that going to work exactly? Again, so here he's going, I thought I was going to have to persevere this long, and it turns out I have to persevere a whole lot longer. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, those are his sons, who were heirs with him of the same promise. Or Isaac gave birth to Jacob. So this is generations of people now. They're going to have to inherit this promise. Now, what I want to show you in Abraham's story is a key. It's like a principle that will unlock amazing things in your life as you persevere with God through your own story. So whatever it is you're slugging through, this is key. And you can see it right in the passage that I just read. And it's this: we need to learn by faith to pitch our tent on the promise. Do you notice that? So he shows up in this place that's occupied, and he's like, I don't know how this is supposed to work. I don't even see the path forward anymore. I didn't think I knew where I was going before. Now it's even less clear, but God said this was going to be my land, so this is where I'm putting my tent. In my yard? Yes, in your yard. Right? So this is a principle that I want to unpack today. Now, you understand how this works. If you're a parent, at least, you understand how this works. Because if you're a parent, do you remember the first time you found out you guys were pregnant? You pitched your tent in the promise. I know you did. Because what ends up happening is you find out the two blue lines, and you're like, what? And you start to, your mind starts going all over the place. You start thinking, wow, we're going to be a mom and dad. How is this even going to work? But you don't get your hopes up too high, because something could happen, something could go wrong, and the first trimester passes, and you're like, oh, looks like this might be a thing, and you start to let your hopes get firing in your heart. And as you get closer to the due date, you get the baby's room ready. You buy a crib and a rocking chair and a little mobile for above the crib, and you start to paint if you know the sex of the baby. And you know what Shauna did? My wife Shauna, when Noah was on the way, I remember we moved a rocking chair into this room that was going to become his room. And this rocking chair, super cool, was the rocking chair her mom rocked her in when she was a baby. So we put this rocking chair there, and I remember Shauna sitting in the rocking chair, and she's envisioning what it's going to be like to have this warm little body on her chest, and sitting there looking at this room. Is it perfect? Is it ready? And imagining coming in the middle of the night. We have a totally, romantic view of what it's going to be like, of course. We don't envision that part. But we're envisioning what we're doing is we're pitching our tent in the promise, right? It hasn't happened yet, but we're living as though it is. We're preparing for the eventuality of this baby arriving. Now, I know that can be weird and it can be sketchy and it doesn't always work out that way, but we all understand that principle. Now, the key to this, of course, is the word promise. So some of you are going, well, I don't have a promise to pitch my tent in. I don't know what God's telling me to do. I don't know how this is going to work. Let me just explain how this worked in Abraham's life, because it'll be really kind of instructive for us as well. So promises from God, we need them to get through. You're going to see this. To persevere, you need promises. These are what you hang on to. Okay? Even in this passage here, it's because of the promised land. And it's the same promise that he gave Isaac and Jacob. It's the promise, it's the promise, it's the promise. But promises, they start really basic and general at first. So at first, God says to Abraham, get up and go. I'm going to show you this place. It's going to be really sweet. Where is it? I don't know. I'm not going to, or he knows. I'm not going to tell you. And then I'm going to use you, your family, to bless the nations. It's going to bless the entire, you're going to become a nation, you're going to bless. So he's like, okay, don't see how that's going to work exactly. As time went on, and he just took that promise and went with it, even though there wasn't much to go on, God filled in the gaps as he went. So eventually, he found out that this nation was going to come from him and his wife Sarai, who were way past the childbearing age, and that this was going to come through his family line, and there were all kinds of other specifics that came. But the point is, you go with what you know until God gives you more. If you're waiting for the entire thing to land in your lap, you will not have it. So we go with what we know until God reveals more. That's how it works. Now, what I want to talk about for the rest of this message, actually, is how do you do this? So you're in the middle of a season, you're persevering, and now the pastor says, pitch your tent in the promise. It sounds so abstract, and in a way it is. So what we can do is we can watch Abraham do it. This is how he actually pitched his tent in the promise so that he could inherit later what God had actually promised. So I'm going to walk you through some verses again through Hebrews 11. And Mike, thank you, wherever you are. This is great. My throat is sore, and he handed me an aloe vera drink right before the message. How cool is that? All right, so here's what Abraham did. There are 4 different principles I want to share with you that really help us to persevere through whatever we're going through and pitch our tent in the promise. So here's the first one. We need to learn to celebrate every win, every single win. How long do you think it was before Abraham saw anything change in this promised land to indicate that it would eventually become his? I bet you every little thing that looked like it might be leading in that direction, right? Where something that he celebrated. But here's an example, specific example. So the promise was, through you, I'm going to create this massive nation that's going to bless the face of the earth. Everyone everywhere is going to eventually be blessed through you. Okay? So his wife Sarah, by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. The promise is a nation, and then it got more specific, so big, it's like the sand on the seashore. It's like the stars in the sky. And God answers that massive prayer by putting a bun in the oven. That's literally it, right? There's a pastor named Bill Johnson. He says, sometimes we ask for God for an oak tree, and he gives us an acorn, right? Like this is the equivalent of that, right? So she receives a bun in the oven. It's bun number 1, but that's a good start if you're trying to build a nation. You got to have kids somewhere, right? Like it's got to start somewhere. So they celebrate the fact that something is happening. There's some kind of motion. Parents, if we don't do this, we die in the trenches with our parenting. If you don't celebrate the little wins, and isn't it funny watching what parents celebrate, especially with social media now? He pooped on the potty. It's like, look, here's a picture. Whoa, too much information. And we're celebrating, and here's little Jimmy receiving the prize, and then at the end of the day, you go, did I just celebrate poop? Because it seems like I just celebrated poop. But it was a step in the right direction, and if you don't celebrate those little wins, you get so discouraged at what is left to be done. And so if the promise that God is going to fulfill in you, if the promise is something like God's going to use you to impact all kinds of lives, or God is, whatever it is, and you don't celebrate every little win, you're going to get discouraged. You're going to think it's not happening, it's never going to happen. We did this actually with Manifest, and it was way better than celebrating pooping in the potty. We along the way, we celebrated all kinds of little milestones. So I remember the day that I was sitting over there in the principal's office talking about the school and just what we could do to bless the school and the neighborhood. And the principal at the time, Carol Hall, who's not a believer, approached. She said to me, well, do you want to rent the gym? Like, I'll make sure you get it. And I know church planters, again, that are going through the phone book trying to find places to meet. And here, 8 months before we needed it, she's told me, I'll reserve that for you so you guys can have it. Cool. That isn't exactly reaching thousands of people for Christ yet, which is our vision, but it's a huge step in the right direction, and God gets glory for that. We celebrate every little win. I remember the very first baptism we had in this gym, at least, and it was a guy named Tori. He does the welcome here. Totally caught us blindside. We didn't think this guy was interested in Jesus at all. Boom, gives his life to Jesus one morning, and then the next week we're doing a baptism thing, and he gets up, and we're like, what? And he got baptized, and I remember going, this is awesome. And again, that's not thousands of people, but it's a bun in the oven. It's something. You know, and I remember listening to Eric a few times, who's leading worship here today. Oh my goodness. In the first year, he was on every single Sunday leading worship, except for maybe one, and just on and on and on and on. And every baptism for a while, we'd be standing to the side. I'd go, Eric, this is yours too. You celebrate this. And he'd be like, oh, okay, I can do this another 3 months. I remember those conversations, you know. It would just fire him up because we're celebrating every little win. It's really good. And Eric is still sort of upright, so praise God. That was fuel for the fire. The second piece that we need to do to pitch our tent in the promise and to persevere is to relish the reward before we see it. So here's a verse, again, from just chapter 11 of Hebrews. It's a faith chapter. It says that without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him, look at this, must believe he exists, that's basic, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. He rewards the faith that we put in him. There is a reward for trusting God. And it's in the process, yes, but it's even more than that. There's stuff waiting for you in heaven that God can hardly wait to give you. There is a reward. It says specifically here that this is important. Now, in the book of Hebrews, a little bit later in this chapter, it says that these people who were trying to walk by faith, and often they would, like this promise he gave to Abraham was inheriting this massive nation and becoming the people. How many generations do you think it took before they said, I think we're there? Right? So here it says all these people were still living by faith when they died. They still didn't have a nation. Maybe he had bought a plot of land and they could live on it, but it wasn't exactly a place that you could build a nation, right? So they were still living there when they died, and they didn't receive the things promised. They received little tastes of it, but they didn't receive the fullness of it. They only saw them and look and welcomed them from a distance. When you can't see with your eyes the promises of God, the things you think he ought to be doing in your life, or the things he's promised you to do right in front of you, what keeps you going? You need to learn to envision the day when it will be fulfilled, and what will that feel like? Welcome it from a distance. That gives us fuel now. We're using the future to fuel the present. Parents, we do this all the time as well. We have to. There are days when we're pulling our hair out, and there are days, and you know you've done it, at least when they're a little older. When they're younger, you feel like it seems like child abuse. But when they get a little older, you're thinking, they'll be gone one day. And I will have my mornings back, or the days that they go to kindergarten finally, and you have part of a day, And it's gold, and it's like, I can taste it. I can smell it. I just want to snort it. It sounds so good. And this is what they're doing. They're welcoming it from a distance. You have to learn to do that. Part of my joy as a parent has been throughout the years accumulating humiliating photos of my children that I will then put into play in full effect on their wedding day, at the reception. The slideshow, it is payback, baby. I can taste it. I can taste it already. And that's enough to pull me through the hard time. We actually tell them sometimes, that's going on the slideshow. Just so you know. You knew it was coming. You know what we're doing? This is another way of putting it. This is what faith enables you to do, okay? Because God holds the future, and because God stands out of time, He's eternal. He sees the entire picture. When we put our faith in Him, what happens is you can, in some ways, you can pretend you're not here, you're there already. And it's not just pretend, like make-believe. What it's doing is a day will come, because we know God is good, because God is faithful, God will take us through. You do this in your mind. You go, a day will come when I will look back at this hard time and I will go, I wish I would have trusted God because He had it. So we're going to use that hindsight that we gained then as foresight now. I know, but seriously, it's what we do. We go, instead of getting there and going, I wish I had trusted God because He had it, I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to look back one day and know that God was faithful, so why don't I just pretend that's already happened? I'm going to take that attitude, I'm going to bring it here, and that's going to take me to where that hindsight comes from. I know that sounds kind of trippy, but that's literally what's going on in some of these passages. We did this. This isn't a terribly good illustration this morning of this, but we did this with Manifest. There was a morning where we were still meeting in our house, and we took the dining room table out of the dining room. So we asked everyone who came that morning to bring chairs. And so we had 45 chairs in our dining room, and there were 20 of us, I think, that morning. So there are 25 empty chairs. And we're sitting there with more chairs empty than are full. And I said, now what I want you to do is I want you to picture every one of these chairs filled. And I want you to pray for the people that are going to fill these chairs. If you came after that day to Manifest, you are answers to those prayers. You are the hindsight that became foresight, that became flesh. Isn't that cool? And on a good Sunday, there's triple that many, right? It's crazy what God is doing. It's just the beginning. Now, this one's really neat, because as you're starting to see, faith isn't just this blind leap belief thing. It's a way of thinking about God's promises and looking to God in everything and looking to Jesus for the things that only He can do. Here's another one that I think some of you are going to find really exciting. You need to learn to develop your faith logic. Sometimes we say that faith is one thing and logic is another. Reason and faith, do they fit together? Watch this. Abraham, way before the Ten Commandments, way before even Israel became a thing, he had the idea of faith logic, and he developed it. Watch. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. So, what had happened is this initial promise, I'm going to make you a great nation. Eventually, I'm going to give you a son. So the promise became more specific, became a guy named Isaac. A child was born, and they're thinking, sweet, it's happening. The bun's in the oven, right? That was the bun in the oven. That was Isaac. And then one day, to test Abraham, God says, I want you to give him back. I want you to sacrifice him to me. Like kill him? Yeah. Now, God never intended for Abraham to do it. He just wanted to see what Abraham would do with it. So here, watch, this is crazy. Watch this. So he who had embraced what? The promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, hey, it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. So this is what it says. Abraham was like, I thought you said it was going to be through Isaac. I did. Okay, so you promised me I'm going to become a great nation. Isaac is like the great white knight. He's our only hope. He's our only kid at this point. And so it's got to be through him. So I guess if I kill him, God will just have to raise him from the dead. Because God said it would be through Isaac. That sounds insane, but it's a faith logic. It's like thinking about the possibilities, because when you're dealing with God, God can do anything. Now, this again is happening kind of inside of me with Manifest. So do you remember when, if some of you know the neighborhood, when the Future Shop went belly up over here and it was sitting empty for like a year and a half? I went by there and I was like, what would it be like to do church in there? Like, how would that even happen? And I felt like God was stirring up my faith to believe that one day we could be in a building just like that. And so that Future Shop kind of became like a placeholder in my mind, an illustration of faith that God, and there was something in the back of my mind that is still kind of there. It's not huge, but maybe this big, that says, I wonder though if one day God might not just still give us that building. So one day, I think it might have been Shauna, my wife, comes to me, she goes, I'm sorry, hon. There's a Winners going in there. And I was like, oh, no. She's like, I know. I said, now they're going to have to move. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but that's what Abraham's doing. Do you see it? Just because that door closed doesn't mean God can't reopen it. That's the logic of faith. Don't give up too easy. Because God can, yes, raise the dead even. I love that part. Okay, so here's the fourth and final one that I want to leave with you. And this one is super important, just like the others, especially when the persevering is taking longer than you thought it would have to take, and you don't know what to do next, and you're thinking, I don't know how long I can even hang on. You know, some people seem to get these crazy breakthroughs with God, and their prayers are answered, and, you know, like a new pickup truck descends from the heavens. It's got angel wings so they can fly to work, and all this crazy stuff happens, but to you, you're just sitting there going, like, nothing's going on for me. What about me? So the book of Hebrews, it's chapter 11, there's all kinds of amazing stories of walls falling down when people shout and giants being slain, and it says others were tortured. Refusing, this is wild, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. That's going to hurt in the morning. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world wasn't worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. What part of that sounds like God is going to give you this promised land? What do you do then? Well, I tell you what, you don't focus on what you're getting. You focus on what you're building. Here's how it goes on in this train of thought. All of these, whether they broke through or not and had an amazing miracle, or the people who didn't see it in their lifetime, or the people who were sawed in two, all of these were commended for their faith. Yet none of them received entirely what was promised. Why? Watch. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And many of us, if you know your Bible, you didn't realize the very next verse is the very next verse. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let's run with perseverance the race marked out for us. At the time they were being sawn in two or thrown into prison or persecuted, none of them probably dreamt that what was happening is they weren't going to be the ones to inherit the blessing of the perseverance. What they were doing was laying the groundwork for you and for me. so that together with us, they can celebrate. Has it ever occurred to you that you need to persevere, not just so you can get the benefit, but so that what you build by walking with God through faith can be passed off to someone else for them to enjoy? Again, parents, we do this all the time. That's what parenting is. So, Glory, my daughter, she's beautiful, she's wonderful, she's great. When she was little, she was naughty and she was defiant and she was sneaky. She found all kinds of ways to screw the system and to get away with stuff. And there were days, where like you wonder why I don't have much hair. It's her. And so but we did things, to celebrate milestones and wins. I remember one day, and I'm not going to show a picture, Glory, don't worry. I remember one day we dressed her up in a little Barbie wedding dress, and I got dressed up in a 46-piece suit. I don't even know how many pieces. There was lots of pieces. This tie and everything, and we took pictures of me taking her down the aisle at the church. I got to tell you, there's something powerful that happens when you realize one day I'm going to do this. What kind of girl do I want to give away? What kind of character? What kind of faith? What kind of person? Now back up. How many decisions, once I have that in my mind, this is the kind of girl I want to give away one day to someone else. What kind of parenting decisions are shaped by that? All of them. So many parents focus just on the now, what they're getting. You're not just getting something, you're building someone. And actually what you're doing is you're building someone who's going to benefit someone else or the world in a beautiful way. That's what it is. Again, we do this. This is super, super important. I love how this is phrased. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. You know what I picture here, especially in the context of this hall of faith and all these things that have happened? I picture, because all of these people were commended for their faith. They're in heaven, okay? So they're lined up. And then Jesus goes, hey guys, because he's the author and perfecter of our faith. That's what it says in the next verse. He gets everyone to come here, I'm going to show you something. Gather around, shortest one's in front. Okay, we're going to look. And he brings them over to some kind of screen overlooking us, okay? And overlooking the world. And the guy who's been sawed in half, he's put back together, and he's there, and he's looking, and he's like, what? They're like, what are we looking at? What are we looking at? And they're watching you and I take steps of faith. They're watching someone lead someone else to Christ, and someone give sacrificially, and someone's coming alive because of faith in Christ. And the guy that around all the people looking, they're like, I don't get it. Why are we looking at this? And the guy who got sawed in half goes, I know what this is. And Jesus says, tell them, this is what we were living for. We thought we were living for us. We were living for them. We were living to pass off a heritage of faith that they could grab hold of. And as everybody's looking at this, going, this is it. This is the fulfillment. This is the dream. This is the promised land. This is it. We get to see it. A rumble kind of shakes through the crowd, and people start to applaud, and they start to cheer you on for every step of faith that you're taking, because you're taking what they built, and you're standing on their shoulders, because they taught us how to live by faith, and you're walking with it, and you're running with it. So then, in light of that, let's run with endurance this race set out for us. Throw aside every hindrance, because not just because we got to get through our little valley, but because by us getting through, we are leaving a legacy other people get to stand on. Right? This is how it's put. Let's run with perseverance. The race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, who, by the way, died. So it wasn't all up and to the right for him either. He took the ultimate defeat, death, and transformed it into the ultimate victory and gateway, eternal life. This is the author and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, that would be you. That would be me. That would be his inheritance coming home, seeing what we do and how we receive what he's achieved for us. He scorned the shame of that cross, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Boom, he won. And now he turns to us and says, hey, it's time to run. It's time to run.